Hi, everyone. My name is Zainab Khan, and I am the Executive Director of MALA, the Muslim American Leadership Alliance. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I know it's a cold January night, and I'm wishing health and wellness for everybody that's watching, that's tuning in for coronavirus, and really hoping the best for everyone, good health and spirits. Tonight is more of an observation and a declaration for Muslim American Heritage Month, which we are so proud to proclaim January as Muslim American Heritage Month. And I'll go into a little bit of a background of why and how Mala started this initiative and where we are with it now. So the purpose of Muslim American Heritage Month is to celebrate the contributions of Americans of Muslim heritage to the United States from its founding to its present. And the national observance in January honors the anniversary of the death of Yaro Mahmoud, who is an African American Muslim former slave, and he's featured in the Smithsonian National Portrait Gallery. I actually came across his story doing research on my own on the history of American Muslims, and I was actually very surprised that I had never really learned about his story. And he was captured in a West African slave raid. Mahmoud overcame great adversity, ultimately purchasing his own freedom and became a very famous Washington financier. The Philadelphia Art Museum even has a portrait of him by Charles Peale, who also painted George Washington and Benjamin Franklin. So, this National Month observance really spotlights Muslims embracing freedom to pursue the American dream and celebrates the contributions of Americans of Muslim heritage to our society. We have an oral history program in conjunction with the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian Museum, which showcases Muslim American diversity and Black Muslim American voices. And really, what we started with this is producing educational materials for schools, for institutions, to provide them with a curricula to explore Muslim American heritage. And just this earlier this month, we are very grateful for Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker to sign a proclamation declaring January as Muslim American Heritage Month. This was a joint effort that was led by our board, our community builders, our staff, our donors, our foundation partners. So we're really grateful for everybody that's been a part of this journey. The proclamation itself has been issued in the state of Illinois, and we are now working on several other states, such as Florida, New York, New Jersey, Texas, California, Indiana, Ohio, Louisiana, and more to come. So again, here we have the proclamation by Governor J.B. Pritzker recognizing Muslim American Heritage Month in Illinois. Again, we are so grateful for this recognition. And I think it's just a wonderful opportunity for all of us to celebrate the incredible contributions that Muslims have played, even just in the state of Illinois. Recently, we were featured on ABC 7 News to talk about the proclamation and the declaration for Muslim American Heritage Month. And we're very grateful for ABC 7 for including us. Featured here is Ahmed Flex Omar, who is our deputy director, and he was joined by Narimon Safavi, who is with us. He's our community builder, advisory board member, and also on our panel this evening. So thank you,
Leadership
ABC7.
Alliance began in 2015 in Chicago to celebrate Muslim American heritage.
We thought it was important to educate our fellow Americans about the contributions of Muslim Americans.
Co-founder Ahmed Flex Omar says a few years ago, the arts and culture organization began having conversations about the need for a month in Illinois to celebrate the contributions of Muslim Americans.
Muslims are not a monolith.
The governor issued a proclamation last December designating January Muslim American Heritage Month starting this year.
I would say at the beginning it was a shock, but then after that, you start processing, what this, truly means, not just for us, but for generations, to come.
This year, a new law also went into effect requiring schools to teach the contributions of Americans of different faith groups, including Muslims. And last week, the state observed Muhammad Ali Day for the first time. Former radio cultural commentator Narimon Safavi says there are many misconceptions about the Muslim American community.
This is a great opportunity to show the better part of the Islamic heritage and the peace-loving and the more of the celebration of the cultures and the diversity.
Omar says since Pritzker issued the proclamation last month, they didn't have time to properly prepare for this year's celebration. So they're looking forward to next year.
Definitely going to be larger efforts next year. But we're very happy that we've welcomed the new year with a Muslim American Heritage Month.
Omar says he wants there to be a Muslim American Heritage Month in every state.
And today we have the honor of having Mr. Clyde El-Amin, who's a nonprofit consultant and educator, and he's also been a part of MAHM since its inception. You can hear a little bit of Clyde's story here through his StoryCorps, which is actually archived into the National Library of Congress.
If we're talking about birth, it begins in Montgomery, Alabama. If we're talking about my consciousness of my journey, it actually began in a rural community outside of Montgomery called La Pine, Alabama, where we lived until I think I was probably entering the third grade. So that would have made me around 7. I was always a year younger than I was supposed to be in school because my grandmother made them take me in school early. So I remember distinctly and then clearly, but probably not accurately, living in the country, living on a farm, being surrounded by a pretty big extended family and participating, in raising food and harvesting everything from vegetables to cotton to, even milking a cow every now and then. But the main thing I remember is the interaction with my grandmother and the stories about what had happened, in our family, in our community, and even in our country before I was born. And during my great-grandmother's life, who I missed by about 8 years. If I'd been born about 8 years early, I would have seen her. She was born in 1843. She died in 1939. That's really the beginning of my journey. But I say the beginning of a bigger picture of the world was when we moved to Montgomery. And, after a few years there, we found ourselves living in a very close-knit community, but also a community that was really pretty much at the center of the world's attention in terms of, the civil rights struggle for human justice, because I lived through the bus boycott, which was really the launching of, the Martin Luther King and many other leaders' careers. So that was just something that I lived, and I think it really shaped my sense of my role in the world to a great degree. But we lived through the bus boycotts, the public accommodations fight, the beginning mumblings of the school desegregation fight, and the voter registration, the voting equality, or the battle for voting rights, because I actually recall going with my mother to some churches where people were speaking about the fight for the right to vote. And I really remember this one little church that we'd never gone to, and it was in our neighborhood, and we had never set foot inside that little church. And so one Sunday, my mother takes us to this little church, and I'm saying, why are we going to this church? I don't remember the name of it, but, I'm like, why are we going to this church? We never go to this church. And Fannie Lou Hamer was speaking at that church that day. And I had no idea who this woman was, but I knew she was somebody powerful. And it was many years later that I realized, oh, that's the lady I saw at that church with my mother. And I remember her singing, talking about voting rights, but I most remember her singing and playing the piano. I realized that my awareness of the Nation of Islam actually started when I was in high school, because these guys used to be on the corner selling the papers downtown. But I've been a typical teenager in Detroit. Like when I would see them, I'd go to the other side of the street because I knew they were going to make me buy this paper. So sometimes they would catch me early. And I would get to the other side of the street, and I would buy the paper and I would take it home. But I would never do anything except take this paper home, lay it down on the coffee table. I never really read it, but I would lay it down. And for some reason, it seems I always laid it down with the backside up. So I would see it, and I'd be sitting there watching television, and I would see that, they had something called What the Muslims Believe and What the Muslims Want. And there were like 10 things that they wanted to see happen for African Americans. So I became familiar with those almost accidentally, but I wasn't planning to do anything with it.
So you can hear the rest of Clyde's story on our Spotify channel. And we will have a conversation with Clyde shortly after we hear a little segment of Narimon's incredible story, which is also on our Spotify channel and is also archived into the National Library of Congress.
Well, I was born in Tehran, Iran, and 57 years ago. But my family had already had a beachhead in the United States in Chicago. Early memories, I ended up coming from Tehran to Chicago directly, and very, very much impressed with the city and the way that the infrastructure was well built. The second day after I came over here, I went and checked out the school, and I was amazed as to the level of facilities that were available here. Big, big open fields for playing football and soccer, and a basketball stadium, and all. I mean, things that even only maybe at the professional level or the national team level, Olympic level in Iran only had those kinds of facilities. And this is just a high school, and it was really amazing. I was shocked as to the level of abundance that there is in this country, and just by the lushness and the greenness and the highways and the freeways and how well built they are. It's amazingly shocking when you come from a third world situation.
And that's just a snippet of Narimon's story, which again, as I mentioned, you can listen to his segment on Spotify, and it is also archived into the National Library of Congress. So thank you for playing these segments and sharing your stories with us. Now, as we before we go into our conversation, I do want to emphasize one of the biggest misconceptions that people have is that Muslim Americans are a monolith. And since our time with Mala, thanks to all of our community builders, storytellers, our grassroots efforts, we've really found there are stories that we've collected from first to fourth generation, ranging from immigrants to asylees to converts to reverts. We are going from, we range everywhere from ultra orthodox to agnostic atheist, which is fine because it's about celebrating your heritage. I quickly wanted to share with you, there is our website on malanational.org, which we will be sharing all this information and this wonderful history that's been collected and archived. As I had said, the stories of resilience really came to me as I was doing research, because out of the 10 million enslaved Africans brought to North America on cargo ships, scholars estimate that at least 10% were of Muslim origin. And though the ravages of slavery prevented the formation of durable Muslim communities, many enslaved African Muslims maintained their heritage. There are historical documents, individuals performing daily prayers, fasting during Ramadan, reciting the Quran. So we've actually compiled a wonderful archive of that. The fledgling communities, the hundreds of thousands of Muslims who arrived in America in bondage were not able to establish formal communities with congregations, mosques, cemeteries, or civic organizations. And it was only until the early 20th century that African Americans, as well as immigrants from Europe and the Middle East, found some of the earliest official Muslim communities in the United States. And many of them being cultural icons, from ballet to R&B to Hollywood, sports. Muslims have shaped American pop culture and left an indelible imprint on American society. Our dear friend and chair of this Muslim American Heritage Observance Committee is Naeem Khan, legendary fashion designer who's dressed everybody from Beyonce to Kate Middleton to every first lady that's served so far in office. And Muslims have also been scientific pioneers. In the Middle Ages, Muslim scholars developed inventions that changed the world, from mathematics to medicine and beyond. And in contemporary American society, Muslim innovators have been mapping the moon, inventing the cable model. So we're excited to share all this wonderful information with you through some links that we will be sharing with you after. But today, I have the honor of having Clyde and Narimon join us, who have been, both of you have been part of our Chicago, Illinois network community for MALA since the inception of the organization. Clyde, I just quickly wanted to touch base and just pass the mic on over to you. First of all, how is it, how do you feel about this recognition? And, how are you going to be observing it? What does it mean to you?
Well, I'll have to be honest with you. I didn't know how much work you guys were doing and when you were doing it. And when I really discovered it, it was pretty much almost a done deal. And I was elated for lots of reasons. One is I have 6 grandchildren. And one of the struggles being Muslim minority in a Muslim majority country is keeping the next generation encouraged about being Muslim and keeping them aware that this is an environment in which they can basically maximize their potential. And certain kinds of gestures and certain kinds of things that happen in the society can either encourage that or discourage that. So when Muslims are recognized from the highest level of a state, for example, I mean, that says to the next generation of Muslims that, America is not only is America your home, America is a place where you are recognized. And even more importantly, America is a place where you are expected to and are invited to make contributions, because that's what brings, I think, the potential out of young people, is knowing that they have something to give more than they have something to get. I think that I don't think I have the words to adequately tell you how proud I am that Illinois, the state that I'm living in now, is the first state to do it. I'm from Alabama and I'm from Michigan. Those are the 2 states that I would call home before I came to Chicago. I've been in Chicago so long now, I probably need to stop talking about them being home, but still that's a reality. And in terms of African Americans on the road to Al-Islam, Detroit is kind of like the beginning of it all. As we talk about the old nation of Islam, they actually started in Detroit, but there were some other tracks also, Ahmadiyas and there were other tracks of Muslims. So I think that Illinois kind of deserves, though, to be the first state to do it. That's kind of how I feel about it, because so much of what happened to magnify the influence of Al-Islam, particularly from the African-American Muslim community, happened in Chicago. So I think that's very appropriate. I couldn't, if I was picking a state, even if I was probably being objective, I probably would have picked Illinois. I don't know if I could have been objective, but I think I would have picked Illinois.
That's wonderful. And I'm originally from Illinois as well, born and raised in Schaumburg, Illinois. And for me, Chicago is always going to be home. Mm-hmm. And that's where we started MALA. And, Narimon, I'm curious to know your interpretation and your kind of view on this also. As an Iranian expat. You're very involved in culture and arts. You've kind of been a cultural icon in Chicago for us in the art and cultural and culinary fields. So I'd love to kind of hear your feedback on this as well.
Well, thank you, Zainab, and it's an honor to be on the panel with you, Clyde, and your activism, your rich activism history and civil rights, and also with the Muslim communities. And I also want to congratulate Mala for having been on the forefront of this recognition, this well-deserved recognition. And I know you may think about many different things about Abraham Lincoln, but I think the land of Lincoln deserves to be the first in this kind of a recognition. And congratulations to Mala, and my deep gratitude to Governor Pritzker for having taken that initiative and having been on the forefront. It is not necessarily a winning political strategy in America to be the friend of Muslims. And this is, it takes a certain amount of courage to do this. So I am glad this is the spirit of Illinois to be here, to be doing this, and I'm glad that this is all happening. But as an Iranian American and as an American by choice, an immigrant who came to this country, it's really superb to be observing all of this. Because when I lived in Iran and we kind of had this admiration relationship with America, but yet also a little bit of a feeling of negative feelings towards America and its interventionist policies in other countries. But yet, it was what was admiring about America was that in the 60s, especially in my family, we loved to see on television that people like Clyde are out there and struggling for civil rights of America. We just kind of thought that's why America is great. It's because it is self-correcting. It is ultimately a place where rule of law and democracy can prevail. And you can see that it's a struggle and it's a process and it's not an outcome. And that's what actually made your love for America even deeper. And so this is for me, this is a process of that the process is continuing. And the fact that the state of Illinois and the land of Lincoln is the first one to recognize the heritage of the American Muslims and its diverse components. We are many different communities. There is no Muslim community. There are Muslim communities. And that we can now try to coalesce together and put together jointly, put up our best face forward and make a contribution to this American experiment. It's a wonderful feeling that this is all happening. And I think Mala is to be congratulated for having been on the forefront of this struggle.
Thank you so much, Narimon. That means so much coming from you. One of the things that I remember, and I'll share a personal story of myself, growing up, reading Vogue magazine and seeing somebody with a fashion designer that's featured next to Prada and Chanel and all these other brands that I admired. And there's Naeem Khan, and I'm like, wow, there's somebody with my name that's in Vogue magazine. And now it's like he's our co-chair, and that it just shows how beautifully connected and powerful and small this world is. We have it hasn't been that long. I'm first generation here. My father is from Afghanistan, my mother was Indo-Pakistani. And as I mentioned, as our team was doing research, one of the most prominent things that I learned about Heritage Month as I was putting this together with our team was Joffrey Ballet. And I had no idea that Joffrey Ballet was actually started by an Afghan immigrant. And he was most people don't know that. And I've been to several of their shows, but he was born Anwar Bey Abdullah Jaffer Khanin in Seattle, Washington. He was born to an Afghan father and an Italian mother. And he found Joffrey Ballet, and he was a pioneer also for the LGBTQ community, which I think is just so cool. And I had no idea he was of Muslim heritage.
Well, that's just like also like Steve Jobs. He was born Abdul Latif Al Jundi in San Francisco. That's what his birth certificate said about it. But he didn't like his father very much, and some family named Jobs adopted him later. So
That's wonderful. There's a question here, or a comment. We are aware that today is a special International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and last week Mala did do a program with Holocaust survivor Sammy Sigmund, and it's on our YouTube channel as well as our website and our social media. There's a question here. Do you find it amazing that our glorious country is able to absorb diversity? For example, is there a Sunni Shiite divide in America as we witness in the Middle East? Not that I'm aware of. I personally never witnessed it. I have a lot of friends whose parents, one is Sunni, one is Shiite. I actually didn't even know the difference growing up as an American kid. So that's just my take on it. I mean, you're welcome to chime in.
Well, from
I'll
African,
tell.
go ahead. No, you
ahead.
go ahead first.
No. As coming here as an immigrant from Iran in the 70s, and then going to university, and I would be running into other Muslims from United States and from south side of Chicago and from all over the world, and until like 1978, 79 or so, when I would talk to other Muslims and I would say, yeah, I'm from Iran and I'm Shia, not that it was a big deal. Most of them didn't even know that there is such a thing as a Shia or a Sunni. This issue all of a sudden became an issue in the 80s. Who is a Shia? Who is a Sunni? And before that, nobody gave a damn. And all of a sudden, some people thought that this is an excellent political issue to exploit. And all of a sudden, the media started to talk about it. It was a foreign concept to most people.
Well, you're probably not surprised to find out that it was foreign to me, but
Yeah.
but it's interesting. My journey toward Al-Islam is so much more complex than people usually imagine, because generally with African American like myself, because there were African Americans that came to Islam that had nothing ever to do with the Nation of Islam, and there were many, probably more, that did at one point. And I just started exploring Islam when I was a college student at the University of Michigan. They had something then called Near Eastern Studies Center. They probably would call it Middle Eastern today, but back then they were saying. And I was a psych graduate student, and even as a 21-year-old graduate student, I still had this problem of trying to sometimes get away from what I had to read for my assignments. And I had what they call a carrel, which is basically a private desk in the graduate library. And I was in the psych section, but right next door to the psych section and all the stacks was all of the Islamic books. So I started roaming because I already had this interest, because I'd heard the word Islam in high school, as I mentioned earlier, in which you played back from me. I just started roaming up and down the shelves, and I grabbed whatever title caught my interest. I found out about 5 or 6 years later, after I had become a Muslim, that I was reading quote unquote Shia and Sunni. Well, it didn't feel Shia and Sunni to me. So I was, So when our community, I don't want to get too long-winded, but people often think that what happened was, Elijah Muhammad died, and then somebody had a vote, and they decided that the community was going to be led by Warith Muhammad. And that's not what happened. I don't know, it was between 6 and 9 months before he died, he actually turned the leadership and made the head teacher, quote unquote, for lack of a better word, of the community. He made that Warith Muhammad. So Elijah Muhammad decided that his community was going to become, quote unquote, clearly Islamic. That wasn't something that was decided by other people after he died. And I was in Chicago, so I witnessed that. And one of the things that was very clear from the very early stages of his leadership after his father died was that we were not going to get caught in this Shia Sunni thing. We were going to be Muslims, and we were going to be open to knowing our brothers and sisters wherever they were, whoever they were. And we've stuck with that.
I love that. I love that there's
That's great.
of so many different experiences just amongst the three of us. And that really shows you a reflection of the diversity and how broad the Muslim American community really is. And quite often it's, again, unfortunately put into a monolith, or there's one narrative that the media, perpetuates, or another, it's really refreshing to me to see that there's so much of this diversity that's also embraced in the United States. I quickly wanted to add one more thing why Chicago and Illinois is home for this is Fazlur Rahman, the Bangladeshi architect that built and created the Sears Tower, which is now the Willis Tower. He was of Muslim heritage, and Mala actually hosted its first community builders luncheon at Willis Tower. As a native Chicagoan, always going to be Sears Tower to me. But that being said, there's just so much incredible stuff to learn, and I'm just so excited to share it with everyone. The curriculum, the research that we've done, the amount of the oral histories that we've collected and that we'll be sharing out and rolling out this year, the salon style in-person events that we'll be sharing as well. Narimon, there's a question for you. There is a history in Islamic orthodoxy of certain art forms being taboo. As a central member of the Chicago arts community, how do you see Muslims challenging these views?
Well, this is a bit of a misunderstanding about some things being taboo in Islam, because a lot of certain artistic forms and certain types of art that is figurative and draws pictures of people, in some interpretation of conservative or fundamentalist Islam, they say it represents icons of before Islam, and therefore they're haram, they're taboo. But that's not necessarily true. If people keep talking about the divides within Islam as to Shia versus Sunni, but there is really a more fundamental way of dividing things. Islam is that whether you are Shia or Sunni, it doesn't really matter. Are you a modernist Muslim? Are you a conservative Muslim? Or are you a fundamentalist Muslim? That is really the main divide that I see within Islam. And there is also in countries that are Shia, those figurative figures are not as much taboo. So those taboo ideas are really concoction of the people who have a very conservative view of Islamic art and Islamic tradition in general. And I would say most artists in Islam are fairly open to do whatever they want. They don't want to be insulting towards any particular person. They don't want to necessarily do anything offensive. So in that sense, there may be some self-censorship going on, but there is really, I think, for the most of the world, in the art world, in Islam, I'm putting an art show together right now that will be at the Expo this April, and there will be female artists from Afghanistan all the way to Iran and Turkey and Israel and Palestine at our booth, and they're all coming. Many of these artists are Muslims. And you will be shocked as to they're willing to break just about every taboo, and many of them think that they're still very good Muslims and they're drawing some very taboo figures. So, but they don't consciously try to alienate or offend anyone or try to be offensive to the sacred beliefs of anybody else.
That's fascinating, Narimon, and thank you so much for explaining that. And as the details of the art show come, we would love to share it with the
We'll be
community
happy to.
itself. It's fascinating. And I recently came across an article also that it was Muslim designers that dominated the runway this year when it came to fashion and haute couture for celebrities, which nobody would ever really think that, these, this would happen. And like, I think that's pretty cool. I think it's really, really exciting that the recognition is being given. We have a question for Clyde here. Clyde, can you tell us some lessons or values that you've learned through your life of activism that you feel are particularly important for building communities in the present day?
Okay, wow. I guess I can say I learned this lesson through activism, but I think my beliefs with regard to this are perhaps the thing that motivated me to be an activist, and that is a combination of unselfishness and realizing your connection to every other human being, particularly in your community. And community, to me, is whomever Allah puts in your presence that can benefit from you in any way. And I think as the quote unquote civil rights movement, and I'm saying quote unquote because I think civil rights movement is a little bit too narrow for what I'm talking about. But one of the reasons I think I responded the way that I did and became so interested in it even as a child, because not every child got interested in it, is because I was raised to believe that one of the worst characteristics you could have was selfishness. And I remember my grandmother, when we were kids living with her in the country, she would take us, we would go to church. And sometimes we didn't have much. I know we didn't have much. And my grandmother would always give us some coins to make sure we put some offering in, at church. And sometimes I would say, like, I don't understand what's wrong with her. Like, we could use this money. So eventually I began to understand that as a human being, and I just happen to think, and I believe everybody believes this about their faith. But as a Muslim, I believe that the Muslim Islam brings out the best of my humanity. And we cannot be selfish and be the human being that Allah created us to be. So when you see injustice to anybody, you have a responsibility to do what you can to alleviate that. So, I mean, I was always a kid that I hated seeing anybody picked on. Sometimes I was that person, but I hated it when somebody was picked. I could never join in picking on somebody. Even as a peer influenced teenager, I could just not do that. So I think that's one of the things that drove me to it, and I was reinforced by it. When I was an activist in college, which I think really kind of shaped me to be permanently, quote unquote, somebody who stood up for social justice, I felt that there were people as qualified as me that definitely did not get into the University of Michigan. Okay.
Yeah.
And I got in almost like it was just the will of Allah that I was with somebody else who was applying, and the guy asked me what my grade point average was. I was at Wayne State. He said, "Oh, you could come to Michigan with no problem." I said, "Well, if I can come to Michigan with no problem," and I did, there obviously are lots of other people that don't get the opportunity that I got. So that kind of fueled me in terms of activism to push the university to open up to minority students. And although it was called the Black Action Movement, we pushed them to admit more Latinos, the first people I met from the Middle East were at the University of Michigan. I became, one of my best friends was from Morocco. And I could not figure out what he was. I don't know, what is this guy? Is he white? I mean, but he hung with us. And I didn't know at the time that I would end up visiting Morocco one day. And I just feel that anyone who has power has a responsibility to those who don't have power. And when someone misuses power, those who don't have maybe as much power have a responsibility to come together to balance the power and get that person to actually be fair to everyone and meet everyone's need. None of us should be, and Prophet Muhammad was the best example of this, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He didn't think any Muslim should go to sleep comfortably if he knew there was another person in the community. He did not say Muslim, that there were other people in the community hungry. Because a lot of times we forget, Prophet Muhammad was not living in a community of all Muslims. He took responsibility for that community. He did not just feel that we had a responsibility for Muslims.
I want to ask a question from Clyde, and I'm wondering if that we're living in very tough times right now, economically and pandemic and global situation. There's a lot of upheaval, and it's very fashionable to be down and discouraged and depressed, and so I'm going to your own little shop. And it seems to me that you have a long history of activism, very rich history of activism, and you must have gone through some very difficult periods also where things seemed hopeless. And wondering what kind of a mental approach is, or what kind of at one point did even your faith help carry you through some of those difficult times? If you could share something with us about that.
I think my faith has always carried me through difficult times. My faith may have had a different label earlier, but when I think about what I actually believed, without question now, there were some things I believed with question, but the things I believed without question were the things that carried me through. And I also had role models of people whose circumstances were much tougher than mine. And I look at how they carried through. I heard stories of slavery from my grandmother that had been passed down to her by my great-grandmother who was a slave. And I never heard her tell a story about a slave giving up. I thought about that when I was about 50 years later. I said, not in one of those stories did she tell me a story about a slave giving up. And then I noticed sometimes things were really tight, and my grandmother had to figure out how she was going to pull together enough food for us on the farm. Food is never consistent on a farm. But she never ever gave up hope. She may have prayed more, but never ever. I think the most fatal disease a human being can get is hopelessness. I think it even can lead to some physical diseases. Especially, and as Muslims, we have too many reasons to not be hopeless, even when other people would be hopeless. So that's what keeps me going. I mean, and I'm also inspired by others. I just met you two days ago, was it? I don't know how many days ago I met you, Nari. But you're like, you already one of my heroes. I mean,
please.
I looked at your LinkedIn page and I'm saying, like, how many hours of the day does he have? I like his secret. But,
oh my God.
But you obviously are the kind of person, you will stand up in a room and say some things that might make some other people uncomfortable. I just picked that up from you. So I think you also have to surround yourself with other people who will keep you strong when your faith could get weak.
Right.
I want to kind of go into that. Actually, this was brought up. Quickly, I'm interjecting. There's a very famous psychologist and Holocaust survivor, Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
Written about hope and purpose and man's way and the purpose, and those words, that reading, it's I have to think of the book. It's the man's walk in life. I'll look it up and put it on the chat. It's not coming to me, but I remember reading that and rereading it, and then hearing a Holocaust survivor last week speak about that. That was very powerful. And yet these are the same words that you are reiterating today. So I think the message is hope, that there is hope. And, amen to that. This is the beginning of it. And, these are tough times, like Narimon said, but there's hope.
Yes. Yeah.
There is hope, and there is also, that you just have to have convictions, and you have to also know yourself. And there will be moments of doubt. There will be moments of questioning, as you say, Clyde, and that is only natural. And some of the most thoughtful, faithful people that I have met are the ones who have had questions and who have had doubts about their faith.
Yes.
Like Simon Pritzker, one of my favorite philosophers, says, the best faith is one that is actually teetering at the border of disbelief. That is the best faithful individual. So, the people who's still using their mind, even though they have faith, they're using their intellect still, and
Yeah.
they use creativity. And I think in the best of Muslim traditions and Persian, Iranian traditions, Middle Eastern traditions, creativity is an act of participation, of communion with God. So you are actually reinventing yourself as a part of, having the part of that. Allah, Allah is the Arabic word for the creator.
Yes. Yes.
So it's all about ultimately creativity and seeking communion with that creator. And this is really where we can use it as a jumping point for our community, and trying to celebrate our heritages and the diverse legacies that we all represent. And this is really where we have to start the conversation. And this is a good time to start that conversation. I wish we could have it be on a month that was a little bit warmer than January, where we could have some community events outside and grill some kebabs as we discuss this to celebrate the culinary tradition.
We will.
Not to disrespect the vegetarian Muslims.
You can do vegan kebabs, we can do all of it. Do halal, kosher. We can accommodate everybody. That's what the beauty of Mala events are. We have cocktails, we have mocktails, we have wine, we have sparkling grape juice, whatever you like. There's a final question, one for each of you. And really, I think this is really important. What are a few things that non-Muslims can do to honor and celebrate Muslim American Heritage Month, or observation of it?
I'll take a stab at it because I have so many, 95% of my family is non-Muslim. Okay, my extended family, I mean. Yeah. And I found that we have to help them understand that we are a reflection in great part of what they have made us. We just decided to find expression for it and fulfillment of it in a particular, down a particular road. And my one side of on my father's side of the family, it's really interesting because he was extraordinarily interested in everything I said about al-Islam. And his family, interestingly also, they were never slaves. So on one side of my family, I got the slave heritage, so to speak. Another side is not. But what he appreciated, and this gets back to what Nari was saying, what he appreciates is he senses a belief in the ability to make things happen. He sensed that in Muslims. And I believe that is a characteristic of a Muslim. With all humility, understanding that it all comes from Allah. We do believe that we are here to make things happen, to serve out the mission that Allah gave us as human beings. My mother's family was very upset when we became Muslims. Their big concern was the food. We were going to all of a sudden not eat her food because she cooked with pork. When we started talking to them and telling her how Islam made us, my brother and I became Muslims, how Islam made us better sons. In a year's time, my mother was cooking without pork better than most Muslims I know. Okay.
Yeah.
So they appreciate that. So I think we help them, first of all, honor what it is to be a Muslim, and then they would celebrate with us any recognition that comes from the state or the feds, etc.
Well, my answer to that would be, again, going back to the roots of words and linguistics a little bit. Islam comes from the Arabic word for salam, which means peace, and it could also mean submission at some point. But achieving peace, submitting to something that is peaceful within you. And the tradition of Islam that I come from is more of that reformist, modernist Islam that really looks at the faith not as a path of necessarily just like being this path of this religious tradition, but we consider Muslims as people who have achieved inner peace and achieved peace with their makers and are also working for peace in the world. So a lot of the more reformist Muslims in Iran, they say you can achieve peace through the path of Moses, you can achieve peace through the path of Jesus, or you can achieve peace through the path of Muhammad. Regardless of which way you achieve it, you are a Muslim, you have achieved peace. So I look at it as this way, as I don't look at it as whether you are a Muslim or you're not a Muslim. If you are a brother and a sister and a comrade in making peace around the world, as far as I'm concerned, you're a Muslim. and you belong to my family, and let's use our creativity and our talents and bring about peace to the world.
You know, I tell on one sentence or two.
Yeah.
What I've been saying to a lot of Muslims is, when someone takes Shahada, it's not something that we are doing,
right,
that makes them Muslim. They are telling us that they're Muslim.
Yes.
We're not telling them that they're Muslims. They're telling us that they're Muslim. And what it means is, back to your point, they came to realize that they are Muslims.
Exactly. That's and it's not like and the same thing with Prophet Muhammad. It's not like he sold Islam to people. He realized that he is a Muslim. He has achieved peace with his own maker, and he basically shared his experience with everybody else. Yes. So, and that's really, it's a fine distinction to make. It's a subtle distinction to make, but I think it's a very important one in having the proper faith.
Yeah. And I know we're running now, and we'll be closing it up. But again, having the proclamation from Governor Pritzker from this for the state of Illinois, we're super grateful. We're very excited about upcoming states declaring the same proclamation. Again, Mala will be rolling out some incredible materials and curricula. Amazing facts that you don't even know or realize, like the inventor of the cable modem is Ruzbe Yassini, and we've done extensive research on the CEO of Ethan Allen, Mr. Farouk Katwari, who's also written a bestseller called Trailblazers. Read his stories and his inspirations and his journey from Kashmir to the United States. Elba is the force behind NASA's Apollo lunar mapping. We have, just an incredible plethora of amazing individuals. Also the founder of Atlantic Records, Ahmet Ertuğrul, who was of Turkish descent. He was actually the founder of Atlantic Records, which most people don't know and realize. Right. Malik Yusuf, who is actually on our committee for Heritage Month. He's a 6-time Grammy Award winner. He's Kanye West singer and songwriter. He was nominated for, I think, 4 more Grammys this year. The Grammys unfortunately had to be postponed, but he's also been an incredible figure for our Muslim community. So again, a lot of really exciting, amazing people, artists, contributors, entrepreneurs, and just the stories themselves that are housed, our oral histories. We're very grateful for the support that we received in Chicago and Illinois. We recently received a grant from Gaylord Donnelly Foundation, which will help us collect and amplify stories of the Black Muslim American experience as well. We're really, really, really excited for 2022, and this is just the beginning for Muslim Heritage Observance. So thank you both, Narimon and Clyde, for joining us. And for everybody else that's tuned in, please visit our website. It's www.malanational.org, and we will be continuing to share stories. We'll put up the information for Heritage Month, the curricula that's going to be adapted by different public schools across the nation. And again, thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you. It was a
Thank
privilege
you.
to be here.
Thank you. It was great. It was a pleasure and an honor.
Stay warm in Chicago.
Yeah, I will.